channel. In this video, we'll discuss about Rancher portal. How do we install and configure the Rancher portal? How to manage the application deployment of the Kubernetes with the help of Rancher portal. Hi, my name is Rakesh Suryavanshi and you're watching Be a Learner. Before we start the discussion, it's my humble request to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and watch all the available content which I have posted on this particular video. Without getting further delay, let's begin the discussion. So first of all, I have opened this particular website, rancher.com, and then go to the why Rancher, which suggests why do you need the Rancher itself. First of all, Rancher is an open source software which you can use to manage your application deployment or to manage your Kubernetes cluster configuration and the application which are deployed within the Kubernetes. So let's say if you have a Kubernetes cluster or one or many Kubernetes cluster within your infrastructure and you would like to manage the Kubernetes cluster lifecycle as well as the application deployment, then you can use the Rancher portal for managing those deployment. Rancher provides the UI level capabilities to manage all your Kubernetes day in day out tasks, and that's where this particular Rancher application is there. Now let's start and learn how do you configure the Rancher onto a virtual machine. For this demonstration, I'm going to create a new Linux virtual machine in my Azure subscription, and then we are going to install the Rancher portal with the help of the Rancher Docker image. Let's begin. So this is my Azure environment where I'm going to create the virtual machine. So let's first of all create a virtual machine which is of type Linux. So I'm going to create a virtual machine of Ubuntu Linux. Provide the detail of the virtual machine. So let's call it as a Rancher VM, and then I'm going to leave the location and operating system as is, which is the Ubuntu latest operating system, and I'm going to keep all the default setting as is. So the virtual machine is ready now. I should be able to connect to this particular virtual machine using the public IP address. I'll open the terminal and use SSH admin rs, which is the name of the username which I have used for this particular virtual machine. It will ask me to provide the password, which I'm going to provide, which I have selected just now, and I'm successfully connected to the virtual machine. Next step, what we need to do is we need to install the Docker on this particular virtual machine. So if I run the Docker on command on this virtual machine, first of all, just to test, let's see if it is available, and you can see that the Docker is not available. So I need to install the Docker on this particular virtual machine. First, I'm going to upgrade the virtual machine itself. Now the upgrade is completed. I need to restart the or reboot this particular virtual machine to apply the upgrades. So let's reboot the machine. Reboot command is successfully completed, and now I will try to connect the virtual machine again. I'm connected to the virtual machine. Now I'll run the Docker install command, and that will download the Docker and install it on this virtual machine. The Docker installation is completed. Let's test the Docker installation by running the command docker ps. Yes, we can run the docker ps command. At the moment, there are no images configured on our Docker hub. Now let's run the Docker Rancher image Docker command to download the Rancher image and configure it on this particular virtual machine. So I'm using the Docker run command with restart unless option so that this particular image continue running, and I'm using this option which is the specific version of the Rancher portal. The reason for that is I just need to make sure that the Rancher portal is supported by the latest version of the Docker, because in the documentation of the Rancher website, if you use the latest version of the Rancher Docker image, it might possible it's not going to support the latest version of the Docker. So you need to make sure that the Rancher version which you are using is very much supported by the version of the Docker which you are using. So for now, I'm using the Docker version 2.4.2. So let's verify if it has been successfully configured. Yes, it is. Now, as we can see that this command is basically exposing the Docker or running the Docker uh, Rancher image on the port number 8443. So if you have a virtual machine which has the NSG configured for within your virtual machine or within the your network on which your virtual machine has been configured, so you need to make sure that the virtual machine or the network is exposed exposing this particular port in order to access the virtual machine from your network. So I can use the virtual machine IP address. So at the moment I'm not using any energy for this particular demonstration, but you need to make sure if you are using it, then it should be running fine. So for now, if I run the HTTPS 443, which is the port number, and there you go, I'm successfully able to launch the Docker image of the rancher, and my rancher portal is ready to run. I'm getting this particular error because I haven't configured any SSL certificate, but if I have the SSL certificate, I may want to configure the SSL certificate. You will find the documentation of configuring the SSL certificate if you want to, but for this demonstration I'm skipping this particular part. So if you go to the advanced section, you can click here on the proceed, and then you should be able to launch the rancher portal. And if you're launching it for the very first time, I mean the image is running for the very first time, you need to reset the password. So I'm going to reset the password of my rancher portal. I will agree the terms and condition. With that, I'm successfully able to configure the rancher portal for my environment. This is the option number 1. You can configure the rancher portal on the plain vanilla virtual machine or Linux virtual machine where we do not have anything configured. But in Azure, if you're using the Azure, then there are virtual machine images available specific to the rancher portal. If I go to the image and then search for rancher, then I should have something available. Let's see that. So you can see that there is an image available rancher OS. So if you want, you can leverage this type of operating system, this type of virtual machine OS, which is of type rancher, and then you can configure basically the rancher portal right here. With that, you don't need to install any Docker or run the rancher image and things like that, basically, and it will configure the rancher portal and it will expose the necessary code basically for your rancher portal, which you can use it as well. But my objective was to show you how this particular operating system has been using those images, so that's the reason we have used the Linux virtual machine for the demonstration. Now you can manage the APIs of the rancher right here from this particular section. You can configure the cloud credential if you want to. Let's say if you don't want to use the local credential, you can set up the Azure AD, Amazon, or any other type of cloud credential on your rancher portal if you wish to. Okay, now let's onboard our Kubernetes cluster to this particular rancher portal. So on my environment, I have the Kubernetes cluster configured, which we are going to onboard onto the rancher portal so that we can manage our deployment. So let's first of all verify what do we have in this particular Kubernetes cluster. So for this, I'm going to connect to my Kubernetes cluster, and I'm already connected. So I'm going to verify the kubectl command, and I will see if I have anything deployed with the help of kubectl get deployment command. So at the moment there is no resource deployed. I'm quickly going to run the kubectl create deployment nginx image. So what it will do, it will configure the nginx image deployment onto my Kubernetes cluster. That's it. Now if I run kubectl get deployment, I should have a nginx pod deployed onto the Kubernetes cluster. The reason I am deploying the Kubernetes cluster, the nginx deployment here, so that we can have a demonstration that whatever existing deployment we have in our Kubernetes cluster, that can be imported right there in our existing Rancher portal. That's the whole objective. Now let's go back to our Rancher portal. Click here on the cluster. At the moment we are on the global or the default cluster, which is at the global configuration, but I can add a new cluster right here from this particular section. You can create a Kubernetes cluster or any which is into Azure, AKS, Google, or any other cloud provider. Basically right here from this particular section you can provide all those details like subscription, client ID, secret, which is a service principal. That will ask for the authentication, and that will basically create a new Kubernetes cluster. With in our case we already have a Kubernetes cluster, so let's see how do we import the existing Kubernetes clusters. For this, I'm going to use this option, import existing Kubernetes cluster, and I'm going to give it a name as the Rancher AKS, and let's click here on the create button. So next, what it says that you need to run certain number of commands to your Rancher portal machine. So you need to run certain number of command to the Kubernetes cluster. So I'll copy these kubectl commands and I'll run it on my Kubernetes cluster. So this is kubectl apply, and that will target to the Rancher virtual machine, and it will apply a certain number of settings. I'm getting this error which is of certificate, and as you can see here in the documentation, it says if you get this particular error, you need to run the following command, which I'm going to run it now. That's going to use the curl. So if you get this error, which is error no object pass to apply, it means the dash symbol after the F, that's where the problem is. So you just try to remove it and then re-add again and then press it enter. That should run it successfully. As you can see, it's running and it has configured the Rancher. So if I go back to the Rancher portal and see, it's trying to connect the cluster. So I'll try to run again and see, it's waiting and now it's active. So we have successfully onboarded our existing AKS cluster to the Rancher, so that we can manage all our Kubernetes cluster in deployment. And you can see that you can view the entire performance and everything of your Kubernetes cluster, what the health of your Kubernetes cluster looks like. Are there any alerts or downtime or anything like that, or any events which you want to look at? You can look at all those events here on this particular Rancher portal itself. Okay, so that's one thing. Now let's see, where do you find the images, or where do you find the application? So now you can see that instead of global, I have selected the Rancher, the Kubernetes cluster, which I have onboarded here in the Rancher portal. Now if I select my namespace, which is the default namespace where I've deployed my Nginx through the command line, kubectl command line, I should be able to find the particular kubectl command line images here. So now if you want to deploy any application, let's say from this Rancher portal, you can use the deployment through the YAML import functionality, import YAML, and then you can import the YAML right here from this particular option. Let's say if you have the deployment configured into a YAML, you can import that particular YAML here in this from this particular option. Or if you want to use the UI option to deploy the application, then you can use the option right here from this particular section. So you can provide the name of your deployment, for example, whatever name you want to call it. Let's say BusyBox, for example, BusyBox, and then you can specify the different configuration, how many pods you want. I want 3 pods, so it will have 3 different replicas of that particular pod. And then you can specify the image name, Docker image name, or the Azure container image name. Basically, you can specify the full path, namespace, on which particular namespace you would like to deploy as. All those things, basically, whatever you specify in the YAML on your deployment, you can specify everything here on the UI section. So if you're not a big fan of kubectl command, then you can use this particular portal to manage your application deployment. And it's not about like not knowing the kubectl command, then only you can manage it. But let's say it's going to have a huge advantage. Let's say if you have a huge number of so many Kubernetes cluster deployed onto an environment, and if you want to manage the troubleshooting or the monitoring or some kind of management, or let's say if you want to enhance, let's say there is a new upgrade to the existing application which you want to deploy to your uh, Kubernetes application. In that case, what you can do is you can use this particular venture portal, open that particular application, and let's say if you just need to upgrade the Docker image of the application so that it can use the latest image on the application, then I can simply do that right here from this particular UI. So that's how it is useful. Okay, I can go to the different sections here. What are the different available secrets, configs, whatever configuration which you have available on your Kubernetes cluster, that is going to be available here to this particular section, to this UI of the Rancher portal. Okay. Again, one more thing before I call off this particular demo, there are some built-in images or application available from the Rancher portal. You can use it. Basically, behind the scene, Rancher is using the Helm chart to deploy and manage your application. So even though if you deploy the application from the UI section, what it does in behind the scene, it creates the Helm packages, and with the help use of those Helm packages, it deploys the application into the Kubernetes. So this is just another example. If you would like to deploy any Helm package library which are already deployed on the Helm website or Helm library, and if you want to deploy those version of the Helm library, you can deploy it right here from this particular section. So if I go to the WordPress application, I can simply just create the WordPress application right here from this particular section. Let's go and create and launch the WordPress application. So I'm going to deploy the WordPress application into a different namespace. I will launch the WordPress application, and you can see that with just a single click I am able to deploy a WordPress application on my Kubernetes cluster with the help of Rancher portal. It will take a couple of seconds to deploy the application, and then we would be able to test the WordPress application right here on this same URL where we have the Rancher. So the WordPress installation is completed. Now if I browse this URL, I should be able to launch the WordPress application, and you can see that the WordPress is targeting to the public IP address of my Kubernetes cluster, and this is how the simplest WordPress installation is being completed. And if I want to go to the details of my application, I can go to the details here by selecting the namespace. So you can see that I have the different namespaces. That's the current namespace where we have the application deployed. So if I go to the apps, this is my application. I can check the entire application, or I can upgrade the application by clicking on the upgrade, and then I can provide the different upgradation parameters. For example, if I want to manage the application right here from this little section. Okay, so when I deployed the WordPress application, it has deployed two different containers for me with the help of these Docker images, and you can see that these Docker images are running as in container in my Kubernetes pod, which is you can see right here from this particular section. I can manage any of this deployment. I can run the logs, execute the cells, so whatever things you can do on your command line parameter, you should be able to do it right here from this particular section as well. I can also view the YAML of this deployment if I wish to. So let's see, this is the current section, and if I go view in API, and this is how the deployment has been configured. So if you are aware about how the deployment for files of the Kubernetes looks like, then you should be able to read this particular information. Different ports are exposed, what are the different resources which have been configured to deploy the container image onto the Kubernetes pod. So this is how the entire deployment, which is been configured with the help of few clicks and with the help of the Helm chart, which is managed by the Rancher portal itself. So this was the demonstration. How do you manage your application deployment with the help of Rancher? As I said, it is going to be really helpful if you have multiple Kubernetes cluster, and if you want to manage the deployment of those Kubernetes cluster application in your environment, then Rancher is going to be your friend for managing those deployment. I hope this particular demonstration was helpful and useful to understand the mechanics of the managing the application deployment of your Kubernetes with Rancher. Thanks for watching the video, and don't forget to subscribe and like to the channel if you haven't already. See you in the next video pretty soon.